Good morning, everybody. So today we're going to have a look at this tySelect modifier. It's actually a rather powerful little thing, and it took me a little bit just to figure it out. But let's just have a look at a quick example here. So we're in Max. We have this plane that's 200 by 250, 40 by 50 segs, just so we get plenty of smooth deformation. And then we have the sphere over here on the left, 15 centimeters, that's been keyframed. So right now we have, I'll turn off the tie push for a minute. So all the tySelect modifier does is select either vertices, triangles, polys, edges, or elements, right? Based on what you set in the parameters. And it can build a rather powerful hierarchy in here. Like you can keep adding. It's not just a one-time thing and then you have to add multiple tySelect modifiers. You can actually build a whole kind of selection list here, and we'll try and go through that. Right now I've got it set to detect the mesh, and I've got soft selection turned on. And let's just see the keyframe so we quickly understand what tySelect does for us. Now we can see as the sphere approaches, we're getting a selection, and we got soft selection turned on here, right? So we can see the selection range that's being applied based on the sphere. And because the sphere is animated, it's also animating the selection as the sphere moves. Now that means we kind of need to do something with this selection if we want to see a response, so to speak, right? So for now, I'm just going to put this type push on there so we can see how you might, one way that you might use this. So now we're pushing whatever selected vertices by the amount in the tie push. And when you come in here to the tie push modifier, we can see here that we can push vertices, and we can see that we can use vertex selection, right? Without it, we won't see a response, right? So that's pretty cool, right? Right there you can see what's going on is that we're dynamically altering this mesh based on the selection that we did with tySelect. So that was the super quick intro. Let's get into this a little bit more in depth. So let's start somewhere. So right now we're selecting vertices, but we can select multiple things like I said. We'll stick with vertices because that is supported by the tie push, right? And then we have this build window here, right? Right now we're doing one tySelect operation, and it's a mesh operation on the selected sphere, and we could add more, and we'll try and show an example of that later where we build a more complex selection set. All right, so this is kind of where you build your selection complexity, so to speak, right? The profiler seems to give you some sort of feedback on everything that you're doing with your tySelect. And then we move into this rollout for baking. Now that means that we can have it remember what's going on. So if we actually add baking, you can see that right away the display changed here, and we have a ramping effect of our original effect that's done over time. So you can see here that as it comes in, it slowly loses the push effect, right? And that's based on what we got set in here. Like right now we're doing decay, which is just, it's going to lose its selection effect over time. So, and right now that decay is set to 0.75. So if I say set this to 0.5, which is a much higher number, then I'm going to lose the effect much quicker, right? And that might seem a little bit opposite to what you would expect. So if we go down to something like 0.01, we're actually going to hold the effect for much longer. And I'm not even sure it'll disappear in my timeline, but you can see it's gradually wearing off. So, that's the decay portion. Okay, so that we saw that with decay, we could hold the effect for a little bit, and the lower the number here, the longer we'll hold the effect. We can also choose to have an age curve. and temporal meaning over time, right? So here we can see we're going to use this curve to alter the effect. So let's move our sphere back somewhere in there, and now it's this age curve that's controlling this effect, right? And then the lifespan of the curve, so obviously if we go lower, it's going to taper off quicker. And then this curve would be like the rate at which it tapers off, right? And you can play with this curve until your heart's content, until you kind of get the effect you want, right? You can see that we can really alter this shape, right? And we've now got this little lump in here based on that and going back up. So now we've got this kind of traveling lump. So the curve is going to affect the shape of the tape off or the decay, right? And the lifespan is going to affect the time. In this instance, the bigger the time, right, the longer the effect holds on, right? So you can see it also moved our little dent back. So that kind of explains this whole temporal effects section and this bake selection. Now finally, in this kind of bake selection area, we have these flows or that we can change the curves with, right? And we have these presets. Now I covered this in my Udemy. I have a full video just on everything to do with this curve editor. But I would say that this is kind of a generic setting in tyFlow, and you can use some presets to change your effect, or you can manually alter this curve, right? The other kind of generic setting that's in this tySelect, and it appears in a lot of tyFlow operators, is the noise. I also have a full video on Udemy explaining all that with all the settings and everything. But anyway, so we can apply noise to our selection. So I'm going to go and say put 20 noise for now. And nothing seems to happen. And at first I thought it was a bit of a bug. But if we kind of treat all these rollouts as hierarchical in manner, right, then I would say that what's going on is this baking of the curve into the effect here is actually overriding the noise. So if we turn off that, we can see now we are getting a noise kind of pattern. And if we go in here and increase this strength, you can see what's going on here with this noise pattern selection, right? So I'm not sure if that's exactly how it's supposed to work, where you can't use the two in conjunction with each other, but it would seem at this point that you can't kind of bake a noise-based selection. But anyway, that's at least the baking and the noise kind of setup explained. And you can see here that we've got this soft selection curve on, right? So we can still have a soft selection. If we turn that off, then you can see our noise is much more defined in a smaller spot. So it definitely looks like we can still use noise and soft selection to kind of change our look and our selection, right? You can see some is actually going deeper. So obviously the coloring here is, this deep dark blue is like a height thing, right? It's the lowest. As we go up until we finally kind of get to red, and red being the tallest part of the deformation, and that is kind of explaining the color, right? So what we saw here was a noise rollout, but there's also a second noise rollout which actually says soft selection noise. So if we go up here and turn off this noise by zeroing it, and we go down to our secondary, which is based on the soft selection, now we can introduce noise into our soft selection. So now the question begs, do we go back up and try and bake our animation? Does that work with this noise? And no, it doesn't, right? It seems like the baking is purely based on the age or the decay, right? So for some reason, I think it would have been nice if it actually allowed you to bake this animation even based on the animated noise. So it looks like bake selection is only going to work with whatever is in this curve section. So we turn that off and we can see here what we're getting. So that's pretty cool, right? Just to show how versatile this tySelect is, I've now created multiple different spheres, in effect kind of creating my own little mini noise pattern, right? And all these spheres have been added to my selection. So in this mesh operator and tySelect. So if we slide it in, we can see right now I have soft selection turned on, and I also have soft selection noise added a little bit, right? So if I turn this to 0, we remove the noise, and if I say do 30, we create this beautiful, interesting effect. Now, I think I've learnt something in the sense that I thought you couldn't bake this kind of animation, because what happens is once you turn this bake on, it kind of prevents you from doing any settings. But it seems like if you do all your different settings down here and then you go up to baking, it'll actually allow you to do these complex selections and bake them using the decay and age curve. Now if I turn this off, right, and now I go in here and, well, let's leave it on for a second. We go in here and now I go down here and we try to change something. Let's try and change the noise to 40. We can see that our selection didn't change. That's because it's already been baked. That's the way I interpret it. So if we turn this off and then we go down here and at 30 we see what our noise looked like. Yep. And then we'll do 50 just to make it a bit more dramatic, and we can see that noise now, right? Now if we go back up to bake the selection, it'll still bake. So I think the discovery for me here is that you do the baking at the end. Once you bake it, it's baked and you can't make the adjustments. So turn it off, modify your adjustments, get everything right, then come back up to bake. That's at least the workflow I see for this. Now this selective inside on this mesh rollout, right? Tyson says, vertices inside the input meshes will be fully selected. Now, if we turn that off, we can see, and we turn off soft selection for a minute, right? We can see that if it's off, we don't see defined vertices or any red vertices. So it seems like it's more of a generic selection when that is off based on the shapes. But if we turn it on, we can see that anywhere where we had a sphere and the sphere covers a vertice, that vertices have turned a definitive red, right? And if we just kind of turn soft selection back on to understand the difference between the two modes, we can see that when we're using the selective inside, we're getting a more definitive, defined soft selection, as when we turn it off, we're getting a softer one. Now, if we look at it in the 3D viewport here, right, we can still see our soft selection is happening based on all of the different spheres I've got connected to each other, right? But when we turn on the inside mode here and we turn it back off, we're getting a more defined kind of deformation. So that's the best explanation I can give for this one. And obviously split elements would be if we had a model with multiple elements in it. This option would turn them into individual polys for the purposes of applying this noise or deformation, right? So far all we've done is related to mesh, and we've only done a single selection list, like we haven't built a stack, right? Now the selection modes that are available here are quite impressive. I mean, Tyson is quite impressive. So we've just looked at the mesh, but these are all the other modes, and I'll try and go through a few of them as examples. Now on the gizmo, it's kind of in a way like the mesh selection, right? Except that you're using the gizmo that comes with the tySelect, and the gizmo can either be in the shape of a cube or a sphere or a plane, and you can modify it to your heart's content. But in my mind, I could probably just use a poly model for the same thing, right? and then I could get more diversity because I got a lot more poly model choices. So, I mean, there probably are times to use the gizmo, but I think I can do the equivalent with a poly model: cube, square, sphere, pyramid, you name it, torus, all sorts of things. So let's move on. So we've been using the set mode. Now what does invert selection do? Well, it actually selects all the opposite vertices. So before we were selecting inside or relative to inside with noise and soft selection, now you can see that the ones that are selected are more or less to the outside. So you're just inverting the selection. At the same time, you can see all the outside vertices of the plane raise themselves relative to where they were originally. In this baking section, we have the time range we can choose for this temporal effect to go into when it's going to be active, right? And the other thing we have is this step per frame, and it's how many times during each frame this temporal effect is going to be calculated. Now, if we kind of look at one of the notes that Tyson gives us, first he says steps per frame is the number of time steps to sample evaluate between frames during additive selection calculations. But then he gives us a note and he says the more steps per frame, the more accurate the overall selection will be temporarily. Increasing the step parameter is most useful for increasing accuracy when selections are generated by fast-moving objects. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at this section. So let's just talk about this window or crossing for a minute. Tyson's explanation is a little bit confusing, but if we animate this box into where it's visible but almost through, like this, right now I'm in vertice selection, right? And we're not going to see any difference between the window and crossing in this particular mode. But let's say we switch to polygons, right? Crossing means that our detection box, the smallest box, if it crosses any part or touches any part of a poly, that polygon will be selected. When we're in window mode, only the polys that are inside, completely inside of the detection zone, will be selected. Now that applies also for element, like if we went here and element or edges, right? So edges, right, we can see that only edges that are inside the window, but if we go here, edges that are also being crossed or touched will be selected. Notice how these outer ones aren't selected, right? So I hope that explains this window and crossing mode. So again, just to show the power of this, now we're actually deforming a three-dimensional object rather than a plane, right? So you can see here, it's really cool, right? Like what's happening to the tySelected box. So, this modifier really is very powerful and it has a lot of useful things about it. So far we've been using it with tyPush because the tySelect only selects what we want to alter or modify or change its behavior, right? You need something now to actually change that behavior. Right here we're using tyPush, and whatever was selected is what's being pushed. If I now turn that off and use tyFace Extrude, we can see that we can create some really awesome kind of effects, right? If I just deselect that for a minute so we can see the result, you can see how powerful that is, right? And all I've done right now on tyFace Extrude is just set an amount, right, over here. And we can combine those effects too. So if we turn tyPush on, right, we're still getting this push effect as well as the face extrude. So just keep that in mind, that you can build quite a complex little stack here and get some really interesting results. So here's an example of building a stack of complexity, right? So in our first one, we have the box influencing the mesh, right, in the downward direction. Then all you do is you add a second selection to your list. So I'm going to re-enable this one. And in this instance, I'm looking at the sphere. So on the first transformation of the selection, I'm looking at a box and sending it down. On the second one, I'm looking at a sphere. And if we temporarily hide those two objects for a minute, right, you can see the result. So from that, we can see that we can build quite the complexity into this tySelect, you know, because you could build all sorts of things, but that's just a quick example. Okay, I probably can't go through all of these modes because there's so many of them, but now we're using the camera frustum or whatever, however you say that, right? But in other words, we're using this camera now to determine the selection, and it's probably as what is seen through the camera, right? And you can see that here I've set it up, and if we move this target now, right, we're going to move our selection zone, so to speak, right? Well, it's probably time to close out this tutorial because right now I don't think I can just cover every option there is in the selection mode. But what I did think was relevant was we try and actually have some particles alter the mesh, right, with tySelect. So let's play the animation for a bit. And we can see that I've just got a few spheres and I've made them pretty bouncy so that they actually come back up and hit the plane multiple times. And if we look at it in this window here, you can kind of see the animation. All right, so I've increased the restitution on all of them so that they end up passing through this plane quite a bit, and we get this cool effect on the selection and with the tyPush. Now, the only thing that I found out here that was a bit I know, to get it to work, I had to come in here to particles and I set my particle radius, but I had to play with this multiplier to get it to actually make some selections. Now, I don't know if that's because of size, relativity to each other, but at the end of the day, I had to increase this multiplier quite a bit before the selections actually happened on my plane. So I think I've covered quite a bit of this amazing modifier. Maybe we'll do another video sometime on a few more of the options, but have fun playing with this. It's actually quite amazing, and I'll see you next time.